Flight 2847 climbed through January clouds at 30,000 feet. 47 passengers settled into the rhythm of travel, laptops, glowing headphones blocking the world drinks ordered and forgotten. In seat 34C, Callum Rhodes stared at his reflection in the scratched plastic window. The face looking back wore 9 years like scar tissue lines carved deep around gray icy eye stubble. He'd stopped bothering to shave the hollow look of a man who'd forgotten how to sleep through the night. Bryn dozed against his shoulder, one small hand clutching Captain the teddy bear, missing an eye stitched and restitched so many times the seams showed like surgical scars. 9 years old, and then she already understood what it meant to hold on to something broken because replacing it cost too much. The granola bar wrapper crinkled in his jacket pocket, $1.79. Their only food for the 6-hour round trip because even airport vending machines were a luxury now. 3 hours and 52 minutes until they landed. 3 hours and 52 minutes to say goodbye to the woman who'd raised him after his father walked out, who'd sold her house to keep him from bankruptcy, who was dying in a Phoenix ICU with stage 4 pancreatic cancer and unpaid bills stacked like tombstones. The plane shuddered. Routine turbulence. Callum's hands didn't even tighten on the armrests anymore. Fear required energy he'd stopped having years ago. Then someone screamed. His body moved before his brain caught up muscle memory from 8 years in intensive care then overriding 9 years of hiding. He was in the aisle pushing past the first-class curtain before he registered the woman slumped in seat 3A. Blue lips, clawed hands at her throat. The universal sign of airway obstruction, except her throat was swelling shut from the inside. Anaphylaxis, maybe 90 seconds before her airway closed completely. The flight attendant stood frozen phone halfway to her ear. A man in the next row filmed on his iPhone. 47 people, and not one of them moved. Callum dropped to his knees beside the woman. His hands rough from industrial cleaners, scarred from broken toilet mechanisms, cracked from Chicago winter cold, found her carotid pulse with the precision of someone who'd spent 8 years keeping people alive in the ICU. Thready, fast, racing toward cardiac arrest. Her purse had spilled across the floor. He dumped it, fingers sorting through lipstick and receipts and credit cards that probably had better limits than his entire year's salary. There, yellow and black, EpiPen auto-injector. He pulled the cap, pressed the orange tip against her outer thigh, felt the click as 0.3 milligrams of epinephrine delivered through wool slacks and skin. Held it for 3 seconds the way the training manual said, the way he'd done it 20-30 times in the ER when patients came in barely breathing. The woman's eyes flew open, gasping, still alive. Callum's hand stayed on her wrist, counting the pulse as it steadied. 140, 130, dropping toward normal, color returning to her lips like a photograph developing in reverse. She tried to speak. He shook his head. Don't talk, just breathe. Medics will check you when we land. Her hand gripped his, desperate, grateful, the kind of grip that said she understood how close she'd come to being at 30,000 feet while strangers watched. Callum gently freed his fingers and stood. The flight attendant was on the radio now, declaring a medical emergency, requesting priority landing. The man with the iPhone had already posted to TikTok. Callum could see the share count climbing in real time. He walked back through the curtain, separating first class from economy. Back to seat 34C, where Bryn still slept, unaware her father had just saved a life. Back to the shadows where he'd learned to exist. The woman tried to follow him 20 minutes later, but Callum pretended to be asleep. When they landed in Phoenix, he took Bryn's hand and disappeared into the terminal before anyone could ask his name. Phoenix General Hospital smelled like every hospital Callum had worked in, industrial disinfectant, trying to mask the Swedish rot of illness, failing. The ICU on the 4th floor looked like the ICU where he'd spent 8 years of his life before Northwestern Memorial became the place his wife died, and he learned that all his training couldn't save the one person who mattered. Marlene Rhodes lay in bed 7, her body so diminished by cancer that the hospital gown seemed to float around her like a shroud. 67 years old. Former labor and delivery nurse. Widowed 12 years. Sold her house in 2019 to pay for lawyers when the medical debt collectors came for Callum after Vivian's funeral. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer with maybe 6 weeks to live, except the doctors revised that to 6 days, then 6 hours. Bryn stood at the bedside holding her grandmother's hand with both of hers, as if the force of a 9-year-old's grip could keep a soul from departing. Marlene's eyes tracked Callum as he entered, still sharp, still seeing everything even as her body shut down system by system. "You look like hell, sweetheart." Callum pulled a chair to the bedside. Hospital chairs, designed for maximum discomfort to discourage families from staying too long, clogging up the hallways, witnessing too much death. "I'm managing, Mom." Her laugh turned into a cough. Bryn handed her the water cup, adjusting the straw with practiced care. "Already learning how to nurse the dying. You've been managing for 9 years. That's not living, baby. That's just breathing in and out until you stop." Callum looked at his hands instead of her face. Easier that way. The hands had scars he could map, jagged line on his left thumb, from the box cutter at Amazon, chemical burn on his right palm, from mixing the wrong cleaners, calluses thick as leather, from scrubbing floors in Willis Tower every night. "I'm taking care of Bryn. That's what matters." Marlene's grip on his hand was surprisingly strong for someone hours from death. Nurses develop grip strength from years of lifting patients, moving bodies. Holding on, when holding on, made the difference. "You're keeping her alive. There's a difference, Callum. You think Viv would want this? You working yourself to nothing. Bryn growing up thinking poverty is normal, both of you just surviving." The name landed like a fist. Callum pulled his hand away. "Mom, no, listen to me, because I don't have time to dance around this anymore." Marlene's voice gained strength as if she'd been saving it for this moment. "9 years ago, you lost your wife. I watched you die right alongside her. Not your body, your soul. You disappeared, hid in those night shifts and warehouse jobs like you could scrub yourself out of existence." Bryn's fingers tightened around Captain. She'd heard this speech before. Every child with a damaged parent learned to make themselves small during the adult conversations that pretended children weren't listening. Viv wouldn't want Bryn watching you hide. She'd want Marlene's breath hitched, the oxygen monitor beep numbers dropping. She waved away Callum's concern. She'd want you to let people see you again, to stop being afraid of being hurt because hiding hurts worse. Callum stood chest tight, the walls of the ICU pressed inward, identical to the walls where Vivian had bled out, identical to every hospital room where he'd learned that all the training in the world didn't matter when the system failed. "I'll get coffee." He was gone before she could call him back. The hospital cafeteria sold burnt coffee for $2 a cup. Callum had 83 cents in his pocket after paying for parking. He stood at the counter anyway, staring at the menu like enough concentration would make the prices drop. When he returned 15 minutes later with a foam cup of water from the bathroom sink, Marlene's eyes were closed. Bryn sat very still in the visitor chair, holding Captain with both arms. "Ba wanted to talk to me alone," Bryn whispered. "So you went to get coffee that you didn't bring back." 9 years old and already fluent in the language of adult evasion. Callum sat on the bed's edge. Marlene's hand found his automatically, the way it had found his father's for 38 years before the heart attack, the way it had found Callum's when he was 5 and scared of the dark. Her eyes opened, clear, present. "Promise me something, baby." "Mom, don't." "Promise me you'll stop being afraid to live. Not just exist, live." Her grip tightened. "I know it hurts. Loving someone and losing them hurts more than anything. But Callum, you're already lost. You've been lost for 9 years. Promise me you'll let someone find you." Callum's throat closed. He nodded because speaking would break something that hadn't broken in 9 years. Something he'd kept carefully locked behind the exhaustion and the night shifts, in the deliberate erasure of self. "I promise, Mom. I don't know how, but I promise." Marlene smiled. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. Bryn climbed onto the bed, careful of the IV lines, and curled against her grandmother's side. "Tell me about heaven, Ba." "It's where everyone you love is waiting, sweetheart. Your mama is there. She's been saving a spot for me right next to her." "Is it nice?" "The nicest place you can imagine. Better than Disney World." Bryn considered this. "Does heaven have enough room for everyone?" "All the room in the world, baby girl." Marlene Rhodes died at 9:47 p.m., her hand in Callum's, her granddaughter singing a lullaby she'd learned from Vivian, who'd learned it from Marlene, who'd learned it from her mother before her. The oxygen machine stopped beeping. The heart monitor flatlined. The fluorescent lights hummed their indifferent song. Callum didn't cry. He'd stopped crying the night Vivian died and discovered tears didn't bring anyone back. Bryn looked up at him with those eyes that were too old, too knowing. Is Ba with Mama now? Yes, sweetheart. She's with Mama. Outside Phoenix stretched under a sky so clear you could see every star, and Callum Rhodes sat in his 2008 Honda Civic, calculating the mathematics of impossible choices. The funeral home wanted $1,500. He'd used his last $214 for the deposit. The landlord wanted $7,600 in back rent or eviction in 4 days. The pharmacy wanted $340 for Bryn's heart medication. The bank account showed $0.17. Surviving wasn't living, his mother had said, but surviving was all he'd managed for 9 years, and now even that was slipping away. Alexandra Winters sat in her corner office on the 78th floor of Willis Tower at 1:30 a.m. because sleep required peace of mind, and peace of mind required ignorance. The private investigator's report lay across her glass desk, 23 pages of surveillance photos, credit reports, employment records, and medical histories that added up to one undeniable truth: the man who'd saved her life was slowly dying of poverty in the city she'd helped build into a tech capital. Callum James Rhodes, 36, former registered nurse with exemplary records from Northwestern Memorial's ICU, left the profession December 2017 with no explanation, no forwarding position, nothing but a resignation letter that said effective immediately, and a license that went from active to inactive within a week. Current employment: night janitor at Willis Tower, Monday through Thursday, 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Weekend warehouse worker at Amazon, 10-hour shifts both Saturday and Sunday. Monthly income, approximately $2,100 before taxes. Current residence: South Loop studio apartment, 2 months from eviction for 8 months, unpaid rent, totaling $7,600. Current dependents: one daughter, Bryn Rhodes, age 9, enrolled at Thornfield Elementary. Diagnosed with ventricular septal defect requiring surgical repair within 18 months at estimated cost of $85,000. Medical debt: $52,000 accumulated from his mother's cancer treatment, his daughter's cardiac care, and the $340 monthly prescriptions he sometimes skipped to buy food. Bank balance as of January 14, 2026, $0.17. Alex set the report down and looked out at Chicago. The city glittered below every light, representing someone's life, someone's rent payment, someone's dinner, someone's medical bill. She'd built an empire in this city. Winters MedTech had 1,700 employees, $800 million in annual revenue, partnerships with 42 hospital systems. Her diagnostic AI was deployed in ICUs across 3 states, helping doctors make faster decisions, helping insurance companies allocate resources more efficiently, helping insurance companies decide who lived and who died fast enough to matter. Her hands shook as she turned to page 17 of the report. Vivian Rhodes, age 29, died December 2017 at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, postpartum hemorrhage following emergency C-section. Medical records indicated severe bleeding began approximately 11 to 15 p.m. Insurance authorization for emergency surgical intervention requested 11:18 p.m. Authorization granted 12:05 a.m., 47 minutes after request. Patient expired 12:23 a.m. from hypovolemic shock, secondary to severe blood loss. Northwestern Memorial Hospital, pilot site for Winters MedTech Diagnostic AI, December 2017 launch. The AI that was supposed to revolutionize healthcare by helping insurers make evidence-based decisions about resource allocation. The AI that her brother Ethan had pushed to launch despite the engineer's concerns about bias in the training data. The AI that had flagged high-risk procedures as low priority for patients lacking certain insurance markers. And Vivian Rhodes' 29-year-old obstetric emergency hadn't triggered the right flags. Alex had signed the deployment authorization. She'd stood at the launch party, champagne in hand, talking about saving millions in healthcare costs. She'd cashed the checks when the insurance partnerships rolled in. And Callum Rhodes had held his wife's hand while she bled to death, waiting for an algorithm to decide she was worth saving. The intercom buzzed, her assistant still at the office because Alex never left, so neither could she. Ms. Winters, your brother is on line 3. He says it's urgent. Alex pressed the button. Tell him I'm in meetings all week. She'd been avoiding Ethan since the investigator's report arrived 3 days ago, avoiding his questions about the foundation, about why she was personally reviewing the scholarship application files, about why she'd asked for the 2017 AI deployment records that legal had supposedly destroyed. Her phone rang, not the office line, her personal cell. Ethan. She let it ring through to voicemail, then immediately called Dylan Webb, the private investigator. I need the funeral home information for Marlene Rhodes, and I need it now, Zutam. Desert View Memorial Cemetery sprawled across 20 acres of Phoenix desert on a Tuesday afternoon that had no business being 68 degrees and sunny for a funeral. 8 people attended Marlene Rhodes' service. 7 were residents of the Sunnydale Mobile Home Park where she'd lived after selling her house. 1 was the minister who did funerals for free because he understood poverty better than prosperity theology. The casket was the cheapest the funeral home offered, pressed wood with brass look handles, $1,200, that might as well have been $12 million. Callum had put down his last money for the deposit. He still owed $986, and the funeral director had been very clear payment in full by Friday, or the body goes to county services. Bryn stood beside him in a black dress 2 sizes too big, borrowed from a neighbor. Captain was tucked under her arm. She'd insisted on bringing the teddy bear because Ba liked Captain. The minister read Psalm 23 in a voice meant to be comforting. Callum heard nothing but the numbers in his head: 986 for the funeral, 7,600 for rent, 340 for medication, 85,000 for surgery, $0 in the bank. The mathematics of failure. Bryn tugged his sleeve. Bo, why are they putting Ba in the ground? It's dark down there. Callum's throat closed. He knelt to Bryn's level, trying to find words that would make sense of death to a 9-year-old who'd already lost her mother, was losing her grandmother, and might lose her father too, if he couldn't figure out how to keep them housed and fed. Ba's not really there, sweetheart. That's just what's left. Ba is somewhere else now. With Mama? Yeah, with Mama. Bryn considered this, solemn as a judge. Ba told me heaven has room for everyone. She said Mama is waiting, and someday we'll all be together again. Someday, Callum agreed, because what else could he say? The service ended. People murmured condolences and drifted away. Callum stood by the gravesite, calculating how much longer he could stand upright. 73 hours since he'd slept more than an hour. 18 hours since he'd eaten anything but half of Bryn's granola bar. 9 years since he'd felt anything but the crushing weight of trying to keep one small person alive while the world ground them both down. Footsteps on the asphalt. Distinctive click of expensive heels. Callum turned. The woman from the plane stood 10 feet away, looking somehow smaller without the first-class cabin around her. Black pantsuit, white blouse, hair pulled back. Human instead of billionaire. But the Mercedes S-Class in the parking lot with its Nevada temporary plates gave away the truth. She'd tracked him down. Rich people always did when they wanted something. You shouldn't be here. Alex Winters took another step forward. I've been looking for you since Phoenix. You found me. Congratulations. Now you can leave. He turned back to the grave. The funeral home crew waited by their truck, probably calculating whether he'd skip town without paying. They knew poverty when they saw it. You saved my life. Anyone would have done the same. 47 people watched. 1 filmed it for social media. You were the only one who moved. Callum's hands clenched. He could feel Bryn watching, reading the tension in his shoulders, the way children of struggling parents learn to read every signal that meant things were about to get worse. You want to thank me? Fine. You are welcome. Now please respect my family's privacy and leave. Alex didn't move. I found the funeral notice through the hospital. I wanted to express my condolences about your mother. And 2, don't. The word came out harder than he intended. Don't do the sympathy thing. Don't do the charity thing. Rich people showing up at poor people's funerals to feel better about themselves. I don't need it. I'm not offering charity. Then what are you offering? Alex pulled an envelope from her purse. Callum recognized that kind of envelope. Thick paper, the kind that held checks with lots of zeros. A chance. I run a foundation that helps healthcare workers who left the profession. We provide full scholarships for re-entry programs, housing stipends, childcare assistance, tuition coverage. 3-year commitment to work in underserved communities after graduation. Callum stared at the envelope like it might catch fire. A scholarship. Yes. Lady, I have 214. No, I have $0 because I just spent everything on a deposit for a casket I still can't afford. My daughter qualifies for free school lunch. I'm 4 days from eviction. And you're standing at my mother's grave offering me a scholarship like that fixes anything. The anger felt good. Clean. 9 years of swallowing rage at the system, at the world, at himself for failing everyone he'd ever loved. It poured out now, hot and unstoppable. My wife died in a hospital 9 years ago. Insurance delayed her surgery. She bled out while the system decided whether saving her was cost-effective. So forgive me if I don't trust rich people with their programs and their solutions and their scholarships that somehow never help the people who actually need help. Alex's face had gone pale. Her hand holding the envelope trembled slightly. Your wife, Vivian Rhodes, December 20, Northwestern Memorial. Callum went still, ice spreading through his chest. How do you know that? That's where my company's AI was pilot tested. The diagnostic system that fed recommendations to insurance companies. She took a breath that shook. My technology was part of what happened to your wife. The world tilted. Callum grabbed the edge of a nearby headstone to stay upright. What did you just say? The AI we launched in December 2017 had a bias in its training data. It flagged high-risk procedures as low priority if patients didn't have certain insurance markers. We discovered it 9 months later during an internal audit. By then, 12 patients had experienced critical treatment delays. Her voice broke. Vivian was one of them. Callum lunged forward. Not to strike, he was too tired for violence, but because the rage needed somewhere to go, and she was standing there admitting complicity like it was just another business mistake. You knew, and you waited 9 years to tell me. I didn't know until 6 weeks ago. Legal settled the cases quietly. NDAs, payoffs. I found the audit report when I started investigating other irregularities. She met his eyes. I've spent 3 years trying to bury the guilt. Then you saved my life, and I can't keep hiding from what we did. Get away from me. Callum. Get away from me. He was shouting now, loud enough that the funeral crew stopped pretending not to listen. My wife died because your company's system failed, and you dare show up here offering scholarships like money absolves you. Bryn appeared at his side, small hand gripping his. She looked terrified. Daddy, please don't yell. Callum immediately softened, dropping to one knee beside his daughter. His hands were shaking. His whole body was shaking. Sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry. Bryn looked at Alex with those two old eyes. You're the plane lady, the one Daddy saved. Yes. Did you do something bad? Alex knelt too, meeting Bryn at eye level. Adults pretending children couldn't sense when worlds were collapsing. I work for a company that made a mistake, a big mistake, and people got hurt. Your mama, her voice caught. I'm so sorry about your mama. Bryn processed this with the solemnity of someone who'd already learned that adults could fail catastrophically. Boss said people who make mistakes have to fix them. She said sorry doesn't mean anything unless you change what you did wrong. The wisdom of children cutting through adult complications like a scalpel through skin. Alex stood wiping at her eyes. Your grandmother was right. She held out the envelope again. I can't bring your mother back. I can't undo what my company did. But I can make sure one little girl doesn't lose her father too, because he's too proud to accept help. Callum stood slowly. His knees ached. His back ached. Everything ached from years of physical labor and not enough sleep and carrying grief like stones in his pockets. I don't want your money. This isn't money. It's a program. You work for it. 15 months of intensive training, clinical rotations, board exam prep. You earn your license back. You go back to saving lives instead of scrubbing toilets. And what do you get out of it? Absolution. Nothing. Alex's voice was steady now. I get nothing. But Bryn gets a father who can afford her medication, who can pay for her surgery, who doesn't have to choose between feeding her and burying his mother. Callum looked down at his daughter. 9 years old and already understanding that poverty was a trap that kept closing no matter how hard you ran. She deserved better. Vivian would have wanted better for her. If I do this, he swallowed hard, if I accept it's not because of you, it's because my mother made me promise to stop being afraid, and because my daughter deserves a father who can give her more than survival. Alex nodded. That's enough. She handed him the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with an address and a date, no check, no cash, just information. Monday morning, 9 a.m., bring Bryn. We'll have housing ready by that afternoon. Why? Why what? Why do you care? You're worth billions. You could pay the settlement and forget we exist. Why track me down? Why offer this? Alex looked at him for a long moment. The desert sun highlighted the exhaustion in her face, the lines around her eyes that spoke of too many late nights in an office tower, making decisions that affected lives she'd never see. Because 47 people watched me die and nobody moved. You moved. You didn't know who I was, didn't know if I could pay you back, didn't care about anything except keeping another human being alive. She picked up her purse. I spent my whole life building a company that was supposed to save lives. You showed me what that actually looks like. She walked back to the Mercedes. Callum watched her drive away, the envelope, heavy in his hand, like a door he didn't know how to open. Bryn tugged his sleeve. Are we going to be okay, Daddy? Callum looked at his daughter, her borrowed dress, her worn shoes, her teddy bear with the missing eye. He thought about Vivian, who'd believed in second chances even when the system failed her. He thought about Marlene, who'd made him promise to stop hiding. Yeah, sweetheart, I think maybe we are. 4 days later, Callum stood outside his apartment building at 2:37 a.m., watching the eviction notice flutter in the Chicago wind. The landlord had been generous, giving him until midnight Friday. It was now Saturday morning, and the maintenance crew would change the locks at dawn. Everything they owned fit in the Civic's trunk and back seat. Not much to show for 36 years. Some clothes, Bryn's school supplies, the medical records. He couldn't afford to replace Vivian's nursing school ring that he'd never been able to bring himself to sell, even when selling it might have made the difference between eating and starving. Bryn slept in the passenger seat, Captain clutched tight. She'd asked once why they were packing everything, and Callum had said they were moving to a better place. Children learned early not to push when adults said things were getting better, because things getting better usually meant things had first gotten much worse. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Creditors had learned, his schedule knew, he worked nights, called it ungodly hours, because that's when people were too tired to hang up. Rhodes. Mr. Rhodes, this is Eleanor Bishop. I'm the program director for the Winters Foundation Reentry Initiative. Ms. Winters gave me your information. Callum leaned against the Civic. The January wind cut through his jacket, 12 degrees Fahrenheit. The weather app said wind chill would drop to -6 by morning. It's 2:30 in the morning. I'm aware. Ms. Winters mentioned you work night shifts. I wanted to catch you before your warehouse shift tomorrow. Papers rustled. Our Monday intake includes housing orientation. However, I see from the property records that your current lease has been terminated. Do you have a place to stay tonight? Callum looked at the apartment building. Lights off in every window. No place for them here anymore. We're managing. Mr. Rhodes, I spent 30 years as a trauma nurse in the Air Force. I recognize evasion when I hear it. Her voice gentled slightly. There's an extended stay hotel 3 blocks from the Foundation Center. We keep a few rooms for emergency situations. I can have you checked in within the hour. I don't. He stopped. Pride had kept him warm for 9 years, but it wouldn't keep Bryn warm in a car with the heat running down the battery. I'll pay you back. The foundation covers it. You pay us back by completing the program. A pause. Ms. Winters was very clear that you were to receive full support. She seems to think you're worth the investment. She's trying to buy forgiveness. Perhaps, or perhaps she recognizes talent when she sees it. Your ICU records were exemplary, Mr. Rhodes. 9 years of perfect patient outcomes, commendations from attending physicians, not a single complaint in your entire tenure. You didn't leave nursing, nursing lost you. We'd like to get you back. Callum closed his eyes. The address book in his pocket held exactly 3 numbers. The hospital where Marlene had died, the pharmacy that wouldn't fill prescriptions without payment up front, and the funeral home waiting for $986 he didn't have. No friends, no family, no safety net, just him and Bryn and the promise he'd made to a dying woman that he'd stop being afraid to live. Text me the address. Already done. Check-in is under your name. 2 beds kitchenette. Stay as long as you need. She hung up before he could say thank you or question why a stranger would help them or wonder what catch was hidden in this sudden reversal of fortune. The text came through. Lincoln Park Extended Stay Room 247. 3 blocks from the Foundation Center, which meant 3 blocks from Willis Tower, which meant 3 blocks from the building where he'd spent 4 years mopping floors, while Alex Winters walked past him every night without seeing him. Full circle, except this time someone was actually looking. Callum opened the passenger door carefully, trying not to wake Bryn. She stirred anyway, eyes opening to focus on his face with that worried expression that no 9-year-old should have mastered. Where are we going? Someplace better. Promise. Yeah, sweetheart. I promise. She believed him because children had to believe their parents, even when belief made no logical sense. Callum started the engine, pulled away from the apartment building where they'd survived but never lived, and drove through Chicago's pre-dawn darkness towards something that might, if he allowed himself the dangerous luxury of hope, be a second chance. Behind them, the eviction notice blew off the door and tumbled down the street, another piece of paper in a city full of broken promises and abandoned dreams. But ahead, somewhere in the blue dark hours before sunrise, a hotel room waited with 2 beds, in heat that worked, and a door that locked, and nobody waiting to take it away. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had yesterday, and tomorrow, Monday, 9 a.m., Callum Rhodes would walk through the doors of the Winters Foundation and begin the terrifying process of letting himself be seen again. Monday morning arrived with the kind of Chicago cold that turned breath to feet and made every step outside feel like a small act of defiance. Callum stood in front of the mirror, in room 247, wearing scrubs for the first time in 9 years. The fabric felt wrong, too stiff, too new, too much like a costume he'd stopped deserving the right to wear. The ID badge clipped to his chest read, Callum Rhodes, Nursing Reentry Program. Black letters on white plastic, reducing 9 years of exile to a bureaucratic category. Bryn appeared in the bathroom doorway, already dressed for her new school. Thornfield Elementary, 3 blocks away, with a library and a cafeteria and a playground that didn't have broken equipment cordoned off with police tape. You look like a real nurse again, Daddy. Callum adjusted the badge, avoiding his reflection. The man looking back had Callum's face but belonged to someone else. Someone who still believed in second chances, who hadn't spent 9 years learning that hope was just another word for eventual disappointment. Just look, sweetheart. Haven't earned it yet. The Foundation Training Center occupied floors 15 through 17 of a building 2 blocks north of Willis Tower. Callum walked Bryn to school first, watching her disappear through doors that looked nothing like the crumbling entrance of her old school in South Loop. Then he stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the building that held his future, and wondered if walking through those doors was courage or just another form of cowardice. Eleanor Bishop met him in the 15th floor lobby. 64, silver hair, cut military short eyes that had seen too much trauma to waste time on pleasantries. Former Air Force nurse, the kind of person who'd survived war zones and bureaucracy and probably wouldn't tolerate excuses about being nervous. Rhodes, you're 12 minutes early. That's either eagerness or anxiety. Which is it? Both. Good. Overconfident students wash out. Terrified ones sometimes make it. She handed him a tablet. Your schedule. Clinical rotations start Wednesday. Today and tomorrow are orientation equipment, training protocol updates. Medicine changed while you were gone. Technology changed. You changed. Don't pretend otherwise. Callum followed her through corridors that smelled like every hospital he'd ever worked in antiseptic coffee stress. The training floor had mock patient rooms, medication dispensaries, monitoring equipment that looked nothing like what he remembered. 12 other students clustered near the check-in desk. Most looked fresh from undergrad, 23 or 24, wearing scrubs like they'd been born in them. They had the clean optimism of people who hadn't failed yet. A woman around Callum's age noticed him, then deliberately turned away. The younger students followed her lead, forming a circle that excluded him without anyone saying a word. He understood the calculus older student reentry program probably had a good reason for leaving nursing, and that reason probably wasn't good. Eleanor called the group to attention. Her voice carried the weight of authority earned through decades of keeping people alive when systems failed them. Welcome to the Winters Foundation Nursing Reentry Program. 60% of you will not finish. The board exam pass rate for reentry students is 43% nationally. Ours is 78% because we don't accept quitters and we don't tolerate mediocrity. She made eye contact with each student. You're here because you left nursing and now you want back in. I don't care why you left. I care whether you remember enough to be trusted with human lives. The first equipment demonstration was on IV pumps. Callum stared at the digital interface, trying to map it to the mechanical pumps he remembered. Nothing matched. The younger students tapped through screens like second nature while Callum's fingers hovered uncertain. A kid who couldn't be older than 23 leaned over. It's intuitive once you get the flow. See, I've got it. Callum didn't have it. He stabbed at the screen, got an error message, tried again. The pump beeped angrily. Across the room, two students exchanged glances. The older woman, her badge read Beth Morrison, 33, smirked. Some of us remember when these things had buttons. Guess we're showing our age. Laughter rippled through the group. Callum's face burned. He focused on the pump screen until the pixels blurred. By lunch, every piece of equipment had reminded him how much he'd forgotten. By afternoon clinical rounds, the attending physician had corrected his terminology 3 times. By 5 p.m., when Eleanor dismissed them, Callum walked to Bryn's new school feeling like an imposter who'd somehow convinced people he belonged in scrubs. Bryn waited in the after-school program room, drawing pictures of butterflies with markers that hadn't been chewed down to stubs. She saw him and her face lit up in a way that made the entire humiliating day almost bearable. How was school? Good, they have an actual art teacher, and the cafeteria has salad. Real salad with lettuce and everything, not just pizza every day. Callum signed her out, noting that the program cost $300 a month, covered by the foundation scholarship. Another debt he was accumulating, another tally mark in the column of things he'd have to repay. The apartment waited 2 blocks away. Lincoln Park, 2-bedroom, furnished clean. Rent listed at $1,800 a month, which meant market rate was probably $2,500. The foundation charged him $400 subsidized, not free. He'd pay it from the monthly stipend, barely enough to cover food and Bryn's prescriptions. Bryn ran to her room, her own room, with a bed and a desk and a window that looked out at something other than an alley. She'd arranged Captain on the pillow, set up her few books on the shelf, created a space that looked almost permanent. Callum stood in the doorway, throat tight. This was what normal looked like. This was what Vivian would have wanted for their daughter, a room with enough space to breathe, a school with art teachers, a father who didn't have to work 80 hours a week just to keep them barely surviving. He'd been offered normal, and taking it felt like betrayal, like accepting blood money, like agreeing that Alex Winters could buy forgiveness with scholarships and subsidized housing. His phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. How was day 1? AW, Callum stared at the message. Alex Winters had his personal number now, was checking in like they were colleagues instead of victim and perpetrator. He should delete it, block the number, maintain boundaries. His fingers tight before his brain caught up. Survived. Barely. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, that's all any of us can do some days. Keep surviving until we remember how to live. Callum set the phone down, unsettled by how easily she'd named the exact thing he'd been trying not to think about for 9 years. Week 2 started with medications he didn't recognize, dosing calculations that used formulas he'd half forgotten, and clinical evaluations that made him feel ancient and obsolete. The younger students had memorized protocols from textbooks published last year. Callum's knowledge came from 2016, which in medicine might as well be centuries ago. Wednesday night found him in the Foundation Library at 11:47 p.m. Pharmacology textbook open to page 247, trying to memorize beta blocker mechanisms, while his brain insisted on thinking about Willis Towers' 3rd-floor bathrooms that needed restocking. 4 months ago, he'd been cleaning this building's bathrooms. Now he studied in its library. The cognitive dissonance made his head ache. Footsteps echoed in the quiet space. Callum looked up, expecting security. Instead, Alex Winters stood 5 feet away, wearing jeans and a Yale sweatshirt instead of the tailored suit she wore in the photographs scattered throughout the building. Her hair was down. No makeup. Human instead of executive. You work late. Callum gestured at the textbook. Can't remember how these drugs work. Used to know it cold, now it's like reading a foreign language. Alex sat down across from him, uninvited but not unwelcome. I own this building. Sometimes I walk through at night when I can't sleep. She glanced at his textbook. Beta blockers. Those are the heart medications. Among other things, block adrenaline receptors, lower blood pressure, treat anxiety. He closed the book. What are you doing here, really? I told you, walking. At midnight, in jeans, in a building that has a CEO suite on the 78th floor. Alex leaned back in her chair, something shifting in her expression. On the plane and when I was choking, you know what I thought about? That you were dying. That nobody would actually grieve. My assistant would be inconvenienced. The board would fight over succession. Stock might drop. But nobody would cry at my funeral because I spent 42 years building walls instead of relationships. Callum's hands stilled on the textbook. That's dark. That's honest. She met his eyes. Then you saved me. This stranger who didn't know my net worth or my company or anything except that I was choking. You saw me as a person who needed help. When was the last time that happened? The question hung between them, genuine instead of rhetorical. When was the last time someone saw you as just Callum, not a janitor, not a struggling father, not a tragedy waiting to happen? Callum's throat tightened. 9 years. 9 years since anyone had looked at him and seen anything except someone to pity or ignore or avoid making eye contact with in case poverty was contagious. My wife used to say people matter more than things. I forgot that after she died. Easier to forget when you're trying to disappear. You're not a ghost to me. The words landed heavy, full of implications neither of them was ready to examine. Alex stood, breaking the moment. I should let you study. But Callum, you are not fooling anyone by pretending you don't belong here. You were an exceptional nurse. You will be again. She left before he could argue. Callum sat in the empty library staring at beta blockers he still couldn't memorize and wondered when exactly Alex Winters had stopped being the woman whose company contributed to his wife's death and started being the person who saw him when no one else did. Month 2 brought confidence creeping back like muscle memory. The protocols clicked into place. Attending physicians stopped correcting him and started asking his opinion during rounds. Eleanor Bishop pulled him aside after a particularly good clinical evaluation. You're top of the class, Rhodes. Don't let it go to your head, but don't pretend you don't see it either. She handed him an evaluation form. Every category marked excellent. Patient care, clinical judgment, documentation, teamwork. You remember why you were good at this? No. Liar, you were good at it because you gave a damn. Most people go through the motions. You treated every patient like they mattered. She tapped the form. That doesn't change just because you spent 9 years scrubbing toilets. You either care or you don't. You care. Callum walked to Thornfield Elementary that afternoon feeling something he'd almost forgotten: pride. Small, fragile, easily crushed, but there. Bryn ran to him at pickup, waving a paper with a gold star. I got 100 on my math test. Miss Wells said I'm doing great for being new. Miss Wells, Patricia Wells, 45, who'd called him last week to say Bryn was adjusting well but seemed anxious about money. She'd noticed Bryn asking other students if they were worried about rent, if their dads had enough money for food. The kind of anxiety 9-year-olds shouldn't carry. That night, Callum cooked actual dinner spaghetti with meat sauce, not just plain pasta. The stipend covered groceries if he budgeted carefully. They ate at the small kitchen table, and Bryn talked about her teacher and her new friend Emma and the art projects she was working on. Normal. This was what normal felt like. His phone buzzed. Alex, free for coffee, library, usual time. Usual time meant midnight. Their accidental meetings had become intentional over the past 2 weeks, late-night conversations about everything except the thing that bound them together. Callum texted back, yeah. He got Bryn settled in bed. Captain tucked under her arm and walked the 3 blocks to the foundation building. The library was empty except for Alex, 2 coffees waiting on the table. You're predictable. You're buying coffee for a student. That's probably against some rule. I'm buying coffee for the man who saved my life. Different category. She slid 1 cup across. How's Bryn adjusting? Better than me. Kids are resilient. He sipped the coffee, good coffee, not the industrial sludge from the break room. She asked me yesterday if we were staying in this apartment forever, or if we'd have to leave like the last one. Alex's expression flickered. What did you tell her? That we're staying as long as I complete the program, which means I better not fail. You won't fail? She stopped, seemed to reconsider. You're exceptional at this. Eleanor told me your evaluations. Top marks across the board. Eleanor talks to you about students. I fund the program. She sends quarterly reports. Alex traced the rim of her coffee cup. Your name came up as someone likely to finish early if you keep this pace. Callum set his cup down, unease creeping in. Is that what this is, checking on your investment? No, this is two people who can't sleep having coffee at midnight because talking to each other is easier than sitting alone. She met his eyes. Unless you want it to be something else. The question, and it was a question, sat between them like a third presence. Callum thought about Vivian, who'd believed in second chances even when the system failed her. Thought about Marlene, who'd made him promise to stop being afraid. Thought about the woman across from him, who'd built an empire but couldn't sleep because she'd realized empires meant nothing if you built them on broken people. I don't know what I want this to be. That's honest. Honesty is all I've got left. Alex smiled, something genuine breaking through the executive polish. Then let's keep being honest. I like talking to you. You don't treat me like a checkbook or a networking opportunity. You treat me like a person who happens to be complicated. We're all complicated. Some of us are just better at hiding it. They talked until 2:34 a.m. about everything that didn't matter. Books neither of them had time to read, places they'd never visit, dreams they'd stop believing in. Then they walked out of the building together, and the Chicago night felt less cold. Swear. Month 3 arrived with Bryn's 10th birthday. Callum used part of the stipend to buy cupcakes from an actual bakery, invited Miss Wells and Eleanor Bishop to the apartment for a small celebration. 6 people in the living room felt like abundance after years of just the two of them. Alex arrived with a package wrapped in expensive paper. Bryn opened it to find an art supply set, professional-grade markers, colored pencils, watercolors, paper, easily $200 worth of materials. This is too much. Alex knelt beside Bryn. Your dad told me you like to draw. Nothing is too much for someone's birthday. Bryn looked at Callum, asking permission. He nodded, and she threw her arms around Alex in the unself-conscious way of children who hadn't learned yet that affection could be weaponized. Thank you. I'm going to draw you something so good. After guests left, after Bryn fell asleep, surrounded by new art supplies, Callum found Alex on the small balcony overlooking the street. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. She's a remarkable kid. She asked me this morning if I like you. Callum leaned against the railing. I didn't know what to tell her. What did you say? That you're someone who's trying to help us. That you're complicated. That I don't know how to explain what's happening between us because I don't understand it myself. Alex turned to face him close enough that he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the vulnerability she hid behind boardroom composure. I haven't let anyone close in 15 years. Built walls so high nobody could climb them. Then you saved my life, and I realize all those walls just made a very expensive prison. Callum's chest tightened. He thought about Vivian, who'd been dead 9 years, and who he'd loved enough that surviving her loss had taken everything he had. Thought about fear, which had kept him frozen and alone, convinced that being seen meant being vulnerable, and vulnerability meant potential loss, and he'd already lost enough. I don't know how to do this. Love someone again. Risk it. I don't know either, but we could figure it out together. Alex leaned forward. The kiss was tentative, questioning, full of the careful hope of people who'd been broken and weren't sure if they could be whole again. Callum's hands found her waist, and for the first time in 9 years, he felt something other than the crushing weight of survival. When they pulled apart, Alex's eyes were bright. Is this okay? Yeah, terrifying, but okay. She laughed, the sound startling in its genuineness. Terrifying is a good start. Month 4 brought the Foundation Gala, Chicago's annual gathering of donors and politicians and people who wrote checks large enough to change lives. Callum didn't want to go. Ballrooms full of wealth made his skin crawl, but Alex had asked, and Eleanor had strongly suggested, and somewhere between being asked and being told, he'd found himself in a borrowed suit, staring at his reflection. Bryn adjusted his tie with the seriousness of a 9-year-old, who'd seen too many adult occasions. "You look handsome, Daddy, like a prince." Princes don't have credit scores in the 400s. Maybe they just don't check. Alex picked them up at 7. Black dress hair swept up diamonds that probably cost more than Callum would earn in 5 years. She looked like a stranger, except for the nervous energy around her eyes. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom held 500 guest champagne fountains, a string quartet playing Mozart. Callum felt every eye tracking him as they entered the scholarship student, the charity case, the janitor playing dress-up. Alex's hand found his warm and steady. "You belong here as much as anyone. More than most." But belonging was a story rich people told themselves. Callum could feel the truth in every polite smile that didn't reach eyes, every conversation that died when he approached every waiter who handed him a napkin, assuming he was staff. Ethan Winters watched from across the room, calculating. Alex's brother looked like her, same sharp features, same expensive tailoring, but where Alex had learned to hide ambition behind charm, Ethan wore his like armor. He'd been circling since they arrived, maintaining distance but never quite leaving. Dinner speeches droned about foundation impact success stories, students transformed. Then Ethan took the microphone unscheduled. "Before we continue, I need to address concerns about foundation operations." The screen behind him illuminated. Photos appeared of Alex and Callum having coffee at midnight, walking together in Lincoln Park, her visiting the apartment. Every image timestamped, dated, compiled like evidence. "My sister has taken a personal interest in one particular student, Callum Rhodes, former janitor, who's received housing, tuition, childcare, $180,000 in benefits, while more qualified candidates remain on the waiting list." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones lifted. Callum felt the room's temperature shift. Ethan's voice carried false concern. "I'm not suggesting impropriety. I'm simply asking, is this appropriate use of donor funds? Should personal relationships influence scholarship decisions?" The implications landed like acid. Alex's face went white. Around them, but whispers built to a roar. Callum stood, his chair scraped loud in the sudden quiet. Everyone turned. The scholarship student, the charity case, walking toward the stage like he had any right to be there. Ethan's expression flickered surprise, then calculation, then triumph. He'd expected Callum to run. Running was what poor people did when rich people attacked. Callum took the microphone from Ethan's hand. "You want to know why Alex Winters is helping me? I'll tell you." The room held its breath. 9 years ago, my wife died in childbirth. Postpartum hemorrhage. Insurance took 47 minutes to authorize emergency surgery. She bled to death while an algorithm decided whether saving her life was cost-effective. Silence so complete, Callum could hear his own heartbeat. That algorithm was built by Winters MedTech. Pilot tested at Northwestern Memorial, December 2017. 12 patients died during beta testing because the system prioritized insurance markers over medical urgency. Alex's face showed shock. She hadn't known he'd discovered this much. Callum turned to the audience. "So yes, Alex Winters is helping me because her company's system contributed to my wife's death. Because she's trying to atone for building technology that treats human lives like accounting problems. But this man," he pointed at Ethan, "he's not worried about propriety. He's worried I'll expose what he covered up." Ethan's composure cracked. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? Internal audit 2020, 12 wrongful deaths, legal settlements with NDAs. But who pushed for early deployment despite engineer warnings?" Callum pulled folded papers from his jacket. "Ethan Winters, VP of Operations, falsified safety reports to meet Q4 launch targets. You killed my wife and you've been embezzling to cover it up. 3.2 million over 2 years. The room erupted. Security moved toward the stage, uncertain who to remove. Alex stood, voice cutting through chaos. "Let him speak." Ethan's face contorted. "Alex, he's lying. Is this true? Did you falsify safety reports?" Her voice held absolute authority. "The CEO, not the sister." Ethan's silence answered. Alex's expression went cold. "Security escort my brother out. The board will convene emergency session tomorrow morning." Ethan was removed, shouting threats that nobody listening would remember. Callum handed the papers to Alex, evidence from an engineer named James Kim, who'd contacted him 6 weeks ago, who'd been paid to stay quiet but couldn't live with the silence anymore. In a private room afterward, Alex stared at the documents. You've been investigating for weeks. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me or thought I wanted revenge money? I don't know. She looked up, tears tracking mascara. My own brother. He killed 12 people and hid it. But you're taking responsibility anyway. Alex's hands shook. Because I should have known. I should have asked harder questions, pushed back, refused to prioritize profit over safety. Her voice broke. I built an empire on broken people. Callum sat beside her, taking her hand. You're trying to fix it. That's more than most people would do. The next morning started with sirens. Bryn collapsed during recess at Thornfield Elementary, clutching her chest. By the time Callum got the call from Miss Wells, paramedics were loading his daughter into an ambulance. Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Of course, the universe had a sense of humor. Callum's hands shook on the steering wheel. The same hospital, the same emergency room. The ER looked identical. Same layout, same fluorescent buzz, same smell of antiseptic and fear. Bryn lay in pediatric bay, 3 monitors beeping oxygen cannula in her nose. Conscious, but terrified. Daddy, Callum forced himself to move to cross the threshold. I'm here, sweetheart. You're okay. Dr. Patel arrived, Bryn's cardiologist. 52, calm, the kind of doctor who'd delivered bad news enough times to make it sound almost gentle. The VSD is progressing faster than we hoped. Bryn needs surgery within the week, maybe sooner. Her heart is struggling to compensate. Callum's world narrowed to a pinpoint. How soon? Days, maybe a week. We need to schedule immediately. The insurance coordinator appeared, tablet in hand, apologetic smile that meant nothing good. Mr. Rhodes, about coverage. Your policy covers $60,000. The surgery costs $85,000. You're responsible for $25,000, and we require a 50% deposit, $12,500, before we can schedule. The room tilted. Same hospital, same system, same barriers. I don't have $12,000. We can discuss payment plans. I have $400 in my bank account. Total. The coordinator's smile fixed in place. Then we'll need to explore other options. Medicaid application, charitable funds. How long does that take? 4 to 6 weeks for approval. Bryn's small voice from the bed. Daddy, am I dying like Mama did? Callum's carefully maintained control shattered. He stumbled from the bay, found the chapel, and pressed his hands against his eyes hard enough to see stars. Alex appeared. Eleanor must have called her. I'm covering the surgery. No. Callum. No, absolutely not. His voice echoed in the empty chapel, bouncing off stained glass that showed saints and miracles and lies about divine intervention. I can't take money from my daughter's heart. Can't owe you her life. Can't. He choked on the words. If you pay, what does that make me? What does that make us? Alex knelt in front of him, gripping his hands. It makes you a father who loves his daughter enough to accept help. It makes us 2 people who care about each other, trying to save a child. You don't understand. Callum's voice broke. When Vivian was dying, I froze because I couldn't process that she was leaving. So it's not just the system that failed her. I failed her too. The secret he'd carried for 9 years, the guilt that had driven him from nursing, finally spoken aloud. Alex's eyes filled with tears. You didn't fail her. The system failed. Ethan's greed failed. You were her husband watching her die. Of course you froze. What if I freeze again? What if Bryn needs me and I can't? You didn't freeze on the plane. You moved instantly to save a stranger. You're not that person anymore. You're not broken, Callum. You're just scared. He looked at her through tears he'd been holding back for 9 years. I'm terrified of losing Bryn, of failing her, of letting you help and having it mean I couldn't save her myself. Alex pulled him close, and Callum finally broke 9 years of grief pouring out in gasps that shook his whole body. When he could breathe again, when the tears slowed, she held his face in her hands. Let me do this. Not because you owe me, not because I owe you. Because Bryn deserves to live, and we can make that happen together. Callum closed his eyes. Thought about Vivian, who'd have wanted their daughter to survive, no matter what it cost his pride. Thought about Marlene, who'd made him promise to stop being afraid. Thought about the woman holding him, who'd spent 3 years hiding from guilt and was now facing it head on. Okay, pay for the surgery. His voice steadied. But I'm paying you back, every penny. I don't care if it takes 20 years. Deal. They walked back to Bryn's Bay together. The insurance coordinator started talking about paperwork, but Alex cut her off. I'm covering the balance. Wire transfer will arrive by end of business today. Schedule the surgery. Bryn looked between them, understanding more than a 9-year-old should have to understand. Daddy, are we going to be okay? Callum sat on the edge of her bed, taking her small hand in his scarred one. Yeah, sweetheart, we're going to be okay. Because sometimes being brave means letting people help you, and I'm trying really hard to be brave. Bryn smiled, tired but trusting. But Grace would be proud of you. I hope so, Rosie. I really hope so. The surgery was scheduled for Thursday morning, 3 days away. 3 days for Callum to face the truth that surviving wasn't enough anymore, that living meant accepting help, that second chances came with strings attached. But that didn't make them less real. Outside Chicago continued its indifferent routine. Inside Northwestern Memorial, in a pediatric bay that looked nothing like the room where Vivian died but felt identical. Anyway, Callum Rhodes held his daughter's hand and tried to believe that this time the ending would be different. Thursday morning arrived at 5:17 a.m. with the kind of pre-dawn darkness that made hospitals feel like their own universe, separate from the world outside. Callum stood beside Bryn's pre-op bed, watching nurses prepare his daughter for surgery, and every cell in his body screamed to run. Northwestern Memorial's pediatric surgical wing occupied the 6th floor, the same building, different floor. Callum could map the route by hard elevator down turn left, the place where everything had ended 9 years ago. Bryn wore a tiny hospital gown printed with cartoon bears. Captain sat on the pillow beside her, one button eye catching the fluorescent light. I'm scared, Daddy. Callum's throat closed. He forced words through it anyway. Me too, sweetheart. But you're still here. That's what brave is, right? Being scared but doing it anyway. The wisdom she'd learned from Marlene recycled back at him when he needed it most. Where'd you learn that? From you. You've been scared every day for as long as I can remember, but you never stopped trying. Her small hand found his. If I don't wake up, don't. I want you to know you're the best daddy. Even when we were poor and you were sad and everything was hard, you never stopped loving me. Callum bent to kiss her forehead, tasting salt from tears he didn't remember shedding. You're going to wake up. You're going to run and play soccer and draw pictures until you fill up every wall in the apartment. You're going to have a whole life, Rosie. Promise, he couldn't promise. Couldn't guarantee the surgery would work, that her heart would accept the repair, that she'd survive the anesthesia. But 9-year-olds needed promises even when adults knew promises were lies people told to make fear bearable. I promise. The surgical team arrived. Dr. Patel, leading 2 residents, the anesthesiologist, with her cart of medications that would stop Bryn's brain from recording the trauma of being cut open. We're ready for her. Bryn clutched Captain tighter. The nurse gently freed the teddy bear, handing it to Callum. He'll take good care of him until you get back. They wheeled her toward the double doors. Bryn's eyes found Callum's over the gurney's safety rails, and he saw Vivian's eyes looking back, the same shape, same color, same trust that the world would catch them if they fell. Then the door swung shut, and she was gone. Alex appeared at his elbow. She must have arrived while he was drowning in Bryn's pre-op room. How long? Of 4 hours. Okay, let's wait. The surgical waiting room held 20 chairs, all occupied by people wearing the same expression, terror wrapped in mandatory calm. Callum couldn't sit, couldn't stand still. Paced until Alex guided him to chairs in the corner. Eleanor Bishop arrived at 6:30, still in yesterday's clothes, carrying coffee Callum wouldn't drink. Heard about the surgery, came to wait with you. You don't have to. I spent 30 years in trauma units. Watched too many people wait alone. Nobody should do that. Hour 1 crawled past. Callum watched the clock, imagining each minute incision retraction, exposure of Bryn's tiny heart, the sutures that would close the hole that had been stealing oxygen her entire life. Hour 2 brought memories he couldn't suppress. Not the details, those he'd promised himself he wouldn't replay, just the waiting, the helplessness, the understanding that some things were beyond his control. You're spiraling. Alex's voice pulled him back. The waiting room, not the past. Bryn's surgery, not Vivian's death. I can't lose her. You won't. You can't know that. Alex took his hands, gripped steady where his was trembling. You're right, I can't know, but I can sit here with you while we wait to find out, and that's something. Hour 3. A family across the room got good news from the tears of relief. They left chairs emptying, new people filling them immediately. The churn of surgical waiting rooms, always full, always desperate. Hour 4. Callum's phone buzzed. Text from a number he didn't recognize. James Kim, engineer, who contacted you about Ethan. FBI arrested him this morning. They want to interview you tomorrow. Your statement is critical. The Ethan situation. It felt distant compared to Bryn's surgery, but it was happening, consequences rolling forward, whether Callum paid attention or not. At 10:12 a.m., Dr. Patel emerged through the surgical doors still wearing her scrubs. Her face gave nothing away until she reached them. Then she smiled. Bryn did beautifully. The repair was perfect. She's in recovery now, breathing on her own. You can see her in about 45 minutes. Callum's legs gave out. Alex caught him and he sobbed into her shoulder, 9 years of accumulated terror releasing all at once. Eleanor gripped his arm. She made it. Your girl made it. Recovery room nurses let him in at 11:12 a.m. Bryn lay small and pale against white sheets, breathing tube removed regular oxygen through her nose. Her eyes fluttered open when he took her hand. Daddy. I'm here, Rosie. You did it. Your heart is fixed. Her smile was drowsy from medication, but genuine. Does this mean I can run now, like other mimes? Yeah, sweetheart. You can run. Good. I'm tired of being the slow one. Alex appeared in the doorway, hesitant. Bryn's eyes tracked to her. Hi, Miss Alex. Hi, Bryn. You're very brave. Bryn's expression turned serious despite the drugs. Are you scared of loving Daddy? He's scared to love you back. But I think he should. Both adults froze. 9-year-olds high on post-surgical medications had no filter. Bryn, you just had surgery. Maybe save the matchmaking. I'm on drugs, Dr. Patel said, so I can say whatever. She grinned. You should kiss her daddy. Ba Grace would want you to. Despite everything, Callum laughed. Alex laughed too, something bright and unexpected cutting through the trauma of the morning. Your daughter is a force of nature. She gets it from her grandmother. They stayed until Bryn fell asleep, monitors beeping steadily, proof of life that sounded like hope. The emergency Winters MedTech board session convened at 2 p.m. in the company's conference room overlooking Lake Michigan. Callum had been summoned along with Alex, FBI observers and legal counsel for what amounted to a corporate tribunal. Douglas Wade presided, 68 venture capitalists, the kind of man who'd made billions by knowing when to cut losses. His expression suggested Ethan Winters had become a loss worth cutting. The conference table seated 12. Ethan wasn't present. FBI had arrested him at 7:00 a.m., charged with fraud, embezzlement, HIPAA violations, and negligent homicide. His lawyer had advised silence. His absence spoke volumes. Wade opened the meeting with characteristic bluntness. Ms. Winters, you called this emergency session. The floor is yours. Alex stood, no notes, no prepared remarks, just the truth she'd been running from for 3 years. In December 2017, Winters MedTech deployed a diagnostic AI system to Northwestern Memorial Hospital. The system was designed to help insurers make evidence-based decisions about treatment authorization. It failed catastrophically. She distributed documents, the 2020 internal audit that Ethan had buried, engineer reports warning about bias in the training data, 12 patient case files, including Vivian Rhodes. 12 people died during the 6-month pilot because the AI flagged high-risk procedures as low priority based on insurance markers rather than medical urgency. We discovered this in our 2020 internal audit. Legal settled the cases quietly with NDAs and financial payouts. I was not informed. Board member Jenkins, 55, former surgeon, read through the files with mounting horror. Who authorized deployment despite the warnings? My brother, Ethan Winters, then VP of Operations. Alex's voice stayed level. Engineers raised concerns about the training data 3 weeks before launch. Ethan overrode them to meet Q4 targets. He falsified safety reports. When the deaths came to light in the audit, he paid engineers to stay silent and embezzled $3.2 million to cover the payments. The room erupted. Board members shouted questions. Lawyers conferred. Wade hammered for order. Callum sat quietly watching Alex take responsibility for a system she hadn't known was broken, but had signed off on anyway. This was accountability without excuses leadership that meant owning failures even when they belonged to someone else. Wade's voice cut through the chaos. Mr. Rhodes, you're here as a witness and victim. What do you want from this company? Callum stood slowly, still exhausted from the hospital, from the surgery, from 9 years of carrying rage he'd never known how to express. I want you to know that my wife was a person, not a case number, not a risk assessment, not a line item in your quarterly report. Silence filled the conference room. But I also want you to know that Alex Winters is trying to fix this. She could have buried it deeper, let the statute of limitations expire, protected the company and herself. Instead, she's here telling the truth even though it might destroy everything she built. He looked at Alex. That's the kind of person the world needs leading companies. Not someone who never makes mistakes, but someone who owns them and does the hard work of making things right. Wade considered this, then addressed Alex. What are you proposing? Full transparency, public report on the 2017 failures, $100 million victim compensation fund with no NDAs. Families deserve to tell their stories. Independent ethics board with operational oversight. My compensation reduced 40%. Annual performance review by the board. You're asking to stay on as CEO? I'm asking for the chance to rebuild this company into something that actually saves lives instead of just claiming to. Her hands gripped the table edge. I'll resign if the board demands it, but I think I can do more good fixing this from the inside than running from it. Jenkins spoke up. What about the financial impact, stock price lawsuits, public relations disaster? Short-term devastating. Long-term, we become a company people trust because we chose accountability over profit. Alex met his eyes. I'd rather lead a smaller company with integrity than a billion-dollar empire built on corpses. The board deliberated for 40 minutes while Callum and Alex waited in the hallway. Through the glass walls, he could see Wade polling members, legal counsel, shaking heads, faces grim. When they were called back, Wade delivered the verdict. The board has decided. Ms. Winters remains as CEO with the conditions she outlined. Ethan Winters is terminated effective immediately, all compensation and benefits forfeited. The company will implement the Victim Compensation Fund and ethics oversight. We'll announce publicly by end of week. Alex's shoulders sagged with relief. Outside Lake Michigan stretched gray and cold under March clouds. Alex leaned against the building's glass exterior, looking smaller than Callum had ever seen her. I was certain they'd fire me. You gave them a choice between integrity and profit. They chose integrity. That's on you. Or they're calculating that transparency plays better than cover-up in the long run. Cynicism is exhausting. Try accepting that people can choose right for its own sake. Alex looked at him, something shifting in her expression. When did you become the optimist? When you showed me that second chances aren't just stories we tell ourselves to feel better. They're real. They're hard, but they're real. They stood together watching the city, and for the first time in 9 years, Callum felt like he'd stopped running from the past long enough to actually face it. 3 months later, Callum Rhodes graduated top of his class from the Winters Foundation Reentry Program. The ceremony was small, 13 students, 20 family members, Eleanor Bishop handing out certificates with the gravity of someone awarding medals. Bryn sat in the front row, wearing a new dress Alex had insisted on buying, applauding so hard her hands had to hurt. She'd recovered fully from surgery, gained 10 pounds, started running track at Thornfield Elementary. Callum accepted his certificate and nursing license with hands that no longer trembled. Eleanor leaned close as she handed them over. Northwestern Memorial offered you a position in their ER. You going to take it? The same hospital. The smart choice was declining, finding somewhere with fewer memories. Yeah, I'm taking it. Good. Face your demons or they chase you forever. His first shift started the following Monday. Walking through Northwestern Memorial's automatic doors felt like entering a battlefield where he'd lost before and might lose again. The ER looked identical to his memories, same layout, same organized chaos, same smell of blood and fear and antiseptic. The charge nurse, Martinez, 42, gave him the standard new hire orientation that assumed he'd never seen an emergency room. Callum let her finish before mentioning he'd done this job for 8 years before. Then you know the drill. Trauma Bay 2 needs restocking. We've got a multi-car accident coming in ETA 10 minutes. He fell into the rhythm like he'd never left, stocking supplies, checking equipment, preparing the bay for whoever was bleeding out on the highway. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Reeves, 50 veteran of 20 years in emergency medicine, ran through the trauma protocol with efficiency that bordered on artistry. The ambulance arrived with sirens screaming. 28-year-old female postpartum hemorrhage after home birth, estimated blood loss 1,200 milliliters and climbing. Callum's world stopped. Same age as Vivian, same condition, same desperate race against bleeding that wouldn't stop. The woman's husband ran alongside the gurney, terrified, exactly like Callum had been 9 years ago. Dr. Reeves called out orders. Callum's hands moved automatically: IV access, blood pressure, cuff, oxygen, saturation monitor. The attending assessed quickly. She needs surgical intervention. Get OR authorization now. The clerk picked up the phone to call insurance. Callum's vision grayed at the edges. His mouth opened before his brain caught up. Check the authorization protocol. Winter's MedTech AI system was removed last month after the safety review. Insurance should approve based on physician judgment, now not algorithmic risk scores. She looked at him sharply. How do you know that? I know people who made it happen. She made the call. Authorization came through in 4 minutes. They wheeled the patient to surgery with time to spare. Callum stood in the trauma bay afterward, hands shaking, realizing he'd just saved a life in the same hospital that had failed to save Vivian. The system had changed, not perfectly, not enough, but enough that this woman might live because someone had fought to fix the broken parts. The husband appeared in the doorway hours later. They said she's stable, the surgery worked, she's going to be okay. Relief crashed through Callum so hard his knees buckled. That's good, that's really good. Thank you, all of you, for moving fast enough. After the man left, Callum found a supply closet and cried not for Vivian this time, but for the woman who'd survived, for the husband who wouldn't become a widower, for the system that had broken, but was slowly, painfully being rebuilt. 1 year after the disastrous gala, the foundation held its annual fundraiser again. Callum stood in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom wearing a suit he had actually purchased instead of borrowed, watching 500 donors celebrate the program that had given 87 nurses their careers back. Alex stood beside him, no longer hiding their relationship. The press had covered it exhaustively. Billionaire CEO and former janitor turned nurse romance built on tragedy and redemption. Headlines wrote themselves. Ethan Winters was serving 15 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and negligent homicide. The Victim Compensation Fund had paid out $90 million to 11 of the 12 families one had refused, preferring to keep fighting in court. Winter's MedTech stock had dropped 40% before stabilizing. The company was smaller, leaner, rebuilding trust, one ethical decision at a time. Eleanor Bishop took the stage to present the year's impact statistics. 87 graduates, 94% job placement, patient satisfaction scores that exceeded national averages. Then she called Callum and Bryn to the stage. 1 year ago, we had a significant disruption at this event. This year, I'd like to show you what actually happens when we invest in people instead of algorithms. Callum took the microphone with Bryn beside him, no longer nervous, just grateful. A year ago, I stood here and told you about a system that failed. That was true. But tonight, I want to tell you what happened after. He gestured to Alex in the audience. Alex Winters did something remarkable. She didn't hide from her company's failures. She didn't pay me to stay quiet. She faced what her brother had done, what her company had enabled, and she made the hardest choice possible: transparency over self-protection. The room listened intently. She gave me my career back, gave my daughter her health back, gave both of us a future that looked impossible a year ago. But more than that, she showed me that accountability matters. That second chances aren't just about moving forward, they're about acknowledging where you've been and doing the hard work to make things right. He looked directly at Alex. I came here tonight planning to talk about the foundation's success. Instead, I'd like to ask Alex Winters a question. Confusion rippled through the crowd. This wasn't in the program. Callum pulled a small box from his pocket. Alex, you spent 3 years hiding from guilt. I spent 9 years hiding from grief. We both learned that hiding just means you carry everything alone. I don't want to carry anything alone anymore. I want to build a life with you where we face things together, where we make mistakes and fix them, where we show Bryn what it looks like when two broken people choose to be whole together. He opened the box. A simple silver band with a small sapphire Vivian's birthstone chosen with Bryn's help, because honoring the past was part of building the future. Will you marry me? Alex's hand covered her mouth. Tears streamed down her face. She walked to the stage and the room held its breath. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. The ring fit perfectly. Bryn had measured Alex's finger months ago during one of their art sessions. They kissed while 500 people applauded, and Callum felt something he'd forgotten existed, joy untempered by fear, hope without the certainty of disappointment. Ding. The wedding happened 6 months later in the Chicago Botanic Garden on a September afternoon warm enough for outdoor vows. 50 guests, mostly foundation students and staff, a few of Alex's board members, Bryn, as flower girl wearing a pin that had been Vivian's. Eleanor Bishop officiated because neither of them wanted traditional clergy. Her remarks were characteristically direct. These two people found each other in the worst possible circumstances. One was dying. One had made himself disappear. Somehow they looked past the dying and the erasure and saw each other as humans who'd both forgotten how to hope. That recognition, that willingness to see past the obvious pain to the possible future, that's what marriage should be. Callum's vows were simple. I spent 9 years convinced I didn't deserve happiness because I'd failed the person I loved most. You taught me that deserving has nothing to do with it. Happiness isn't earned, it's chosen. I choose you. I choose us. I choose building something real instead of hiding from everything that hurts. Alex's vows came through tears. I spent my whole life measuring success in numbers, revenue, stock price, net worth. Then I met someone who measured success by whether his daughter had enough to eat, whether he could keep a roof over their heads, whether he could be present for one more day. You showed me what actually matters. People, connection, the choice to keep trying even when trying feels impossible. I love you. I choose you. Forever. They were pronounced married to applause from people who'd watched them climb out of separate hells towards something that looked like peace. The reception featured barbecue instead of catering, dancing instead of speeches, joy instead of pretense. Bryn danced with Callum, stepping on his feet, laughing with the unself-conscious freedom of a child who'd survived and thrived. But Grace would love this, wouldn't she? Yeah, Rosie, she would. And Mama. Mama too. She'd want us to be happy, all of us. I'm happy, Daddy. Are you? Callum looked across the dance floor at Alex, who was laughing with Eleanor about something who'd chosen transparency over self-protection, who'd rebuilt a company and a life around the principle that people mattered more than profit. Yeah, sweetheart, I'm happy. As the sun set over the garden, Callum Rhodes, formerly lost, currently found, permanently grateful, held his family close, and understood that second chances weren't just given. They were built piece by careful piece by people brave enough to stop hiding and start living. The past couldn't be changed. Vivian was still gone. Marlene was still gone. 9 years of poverty and pain couldn't be erased. But the future stretched ahead like an open road, and for the first time since that December night when everything ended, Callum believed the road might lead somewhere worth going. He'd been invisible because he chose to be. Because being seen meant being vulnerable, and vulnerability meant risk, and he'd already risked everything and lost. But Alex had taught him something Marlene had known all along: hiding from loss meant hiding from life. And life, messy, complicated, beautiful life, was worth the risk. So Callum Rhodes stopped being invisible. And when people finally saw him, they found someone worth seeing.